Hello, and welcome back to the final episode of our lesson 4, which takes us from late 1917 to about 1924. This is the last part of Versailles and after the New World. And what an interesting world it is. So we're going to go today from June 1919 to right about 1924. We're looking at the May elections of 1924. And that should wrap up this presentation here. All right. Now, I just couldn't pass up this picture of one of the Freikorps units. I think this is Berlin, if I'm remembering correctly. I would have to check on that. The skull and crossbones motif just made it too good to pass up here. So we have these emerging Freikorps units. We have the suppression of the sort of disorganized, quasi-spontaneous, and sort of ill-advised Spartacist uprising, which wasn't really going to deliver, was not going to deliver much, but served as very good political fodder, both for the Social Democrats, particularly their leadership, which is drifting, just pulling back hard from anything that might look like it could go in the direction of the October Revolution in Russia, as well as monarchist, conservative, and increasing what we'll call far-right elements. So, Liebknecht's funeral, by the way, was attended by well over 100,000 people. So the interesting thing is that there's a number of people who come out to support him and pay homage to him in death, who were not about to support him in Luxembourg in the revolution, in their revolution. So you have people who feel, well, all right, this went way too far. This should never have happened. I'm not sure, like, if these Freikorps people, but we can't have a revolution like that. That's just not good. So you see this kind of diffidence even in Berlin. Berlin tends to go definitely liberal, if not left. This is going to be one of the main things to look at when we get to the Nazi Party. This is where Joseph Goebbels cuts his teeth. He makes Berlin his project. In any case. So while all of this is going on, and we have the fallout of the revolution, remember, is it April or May? The Bavarian Republic is taken apart and suppressed by a convergence of Freikorps units. June 29th, the German delegation, which answers now to this new government headed by the Social Democrats, June 28th, comes to Versailles, Hall of Mirrors, and they're presented this document, and you will sign it. They were not consulted. They thought they were going to be consulted, but Wilson, Lloyd George, and Clemenceau, I think at this point Orlando had actually left, because Italy wasn't, he'd left the proceedings. Italy was not getting what it wanted, and so Vittorio Orlando was like, whatever, a better thing. I have a country that's falling apart on its own to deal with. Wilson, Clemenceau, and Lloyd George are not really interested in hearing German excuses. And of course, the three main things that come out of this in terms of what we're interested in are new borders. You have a new, which is some of the hard lines here. You have a new Poland. You have a Czechoslovakia, a Hungary, a rather enlarged Romania, this new country called Yugoslavia, a new country called that. You have Albania formally. You have France recovering Alsace-Lorraine, and so on and so forth. We've been over these things before. Certainly, we talked about them in 102. This is the sort of Treaty of Versailles 101 that you would expect. A couple of the things it does. First of all, of course, it has a clause in which Germany admits that its guilt for the war. This is the war guilt clause. As hopefully has become somewhat clear, people have a lot of things on their mind in November, December, and January 1918-19. But hearing that the rest of the victorious allies are holding them responsible for a war which they know they didn't start. If you're living in Germany, you know you didn't start the war. And in fact, a lot of the more recent scholarship in the last 6 or 7 years has sort of shown that, yeah, Germany might not have helped, but it's not as clear. The old Fritz Stern thesis that it's Germany, Germany, Germany all the way down just doesn't work. Well, now there it is in the treaty. You've admitted to it for all time. But the other thing that it does is it imposes reparations, because if you caused the war, then you got to pay for what you broke. Now, Clemenceau is sort of insisting on some sort of reparations anyway, because a lot of France's industrial heartland was occupied and destroyed by Germany. Most economists, including perhaps most famously John Maynard Keynes, who's going to go on to basically create macroeconomics eventually in the 30s, think this is a bad idea. A prosperous, stable Germany is essential for European peace. If you lay this burden on them, that's not a recipe for success. How are you going to enforce it? Who's going to make sure that Germany doesn't dissolve? Because at the end of the day, if you can't pay your debts, no one's going to loan to you to begin with. And furthermore, no one's really going to care if you get invaded or picked apart. Germany sitting in the literal center of Europe as it is, that's not something anyone should want. However, reparations go through anyway, and the key here comes from some of the numbers that you get from, in this case, Adam Tooze's magnificent work, The Deluge, which is about the new world global financial order, often sort of at the behest of the United States from about 1916 to 1930. And what you get from this is that the Allies owe, by the time you get to February 1922, both principal and net interest, the Allies owe nearly $10 billion to the United States. This was the cost of keeping their war efforts afloat. Britain, pre-armistice loans. Britain borrows almost $3.7 billion. France borrows nearly $2 billion. Italy borrows $1 billion, and so on and so forth. Down you go. Now, Russia, Russia, good luck getting that money out of Russia. However, France and Britain need to pay the U.S. back. The U.S. can't release them. Can't release them from these debts because the U.S. First of all, there's not the mechanisms for making these sorts of loans are kind of being created. This is one of the big thrusts of Tooze's work, and one of the ways, of course, that Democrat administrations raise this sort of cash for loans or war expenditures or whatever is through bonds. Which means that the cost is borne directly by the American people. So not only is debt being in debt, holding someone's debts a lot of leverage. There's also a lot of incentive here. You can't just write this off. So Britain and France are going to pay, but they can't pay because they're exhausted and they're broke as well. So Germany's the one who's going to have to pay, and this is going to be an underlying theme throughout the 1920s. Right now, of course, Hitler's going to try to parlay this into the great, the evil Allies trying to take, stick it to Germany and so on and so forth. But the fact is, this was, of course, it's widely resented, but there is a hard financial reason behind why Britain and France are demanding these payments. And as we can see here, in terms of the treaty national income, the highest year is 8.2% of their of national income goes to treaty payments. Now you'll notice here of 1924 that it sort of drops off. So there's a renegotiation. This period here is when eventually Germany's going to default, 23, and the renegotiation of this war reparations payment is going to be the foundation for these kind of short-lived, brittle prosperity of the Weimar years. In other hard political outcomes, we have chunks of the German Reich which are separated and going to Poland. We have the Rhineland being occupied. We have the Saar, which is one of the other major coal-producing industrial areas of Germany, under sort of League of Nations mandate. A lot of that's supposed to go to France. An adjustment here of the northern border, that's a really complicated diplomatic story, which I'm not going to go into because even I can't follow that so much. There are studies that tease apart what's like the Schleswig-Holstein question. This goes back to the 1850s, early 1860s, culminating in the 1864 Prussian-Danish War, and it's just, it's really, really complicated. More concrete terms, 100% of the colonies are gone, 80% of the pre-war fleet, 48% of iron, 16% of coal, 13% of territory, and 12% of population. This is a significant defeat. And it's interesting. Remember, in terms of some of the specific documents to go along with the early republic, one of the things I'm having you look at is the some of the political platforms of the different parties. And the Catholic Center Party is very interesting because one of the clauses in their platform is that the colonies question cannot be regarded as settled. In other words, we're going to get our colonies back at some point, which is quite an interesting take. So this is sort of the hard version of this. Now, this area here, this is Silesia, and it's not at all clear in a number of these areas whether they're going to join, particularly in this area here, whether they're going to join Poland or not. Unexpectedly divided into two zones. A plebiscite produced a majority favoring remaining German. There's a whole number of stories here. There are multiple uprisings in Silesia. In fact, some of the Freikorps units and military units involved in putting down the various revolutionary movements are sent down here as well. There's also, if I'm remembering correctly, there's like a settlement movement to sort of drive up the voting numbers of Germans in this area. There are multiple Polish uprisings and sort of active protests, if you will. Now, of course, also in 1919, the new Poland goes to war with Russia, right? They already squeezed out Ukraine, and then Soviet Russia, the Bolshevik Russia, and Poland go to war as well. And the furthest extent of the Red Army in Poland, this is a major war which is often forgotten, but this has a major impact on public opinion in Germany at the time, particularly the conservative factions. Rumors that Warsaw's actually fallen to the Red Army, and then it turns out no, they're not. So Poland sort of is the bulwark against Bolshevism, and yet, of course, Poles aren't really perceived that way because, well, they just took a whole chunk of Germany. Charles de Gaulle actually served there. I think he was he attaché to one of the French observers. The French had a major presence, sort of at least an observing presence there. So this conflict is going on at the same time. Now, as we get to 1920, the Ebert's government decides that the Freikorps need to be taken in hand here, and they need to be disbanded. Again, one of the main concerns of Ebert's government is to avoid revolution or coup. And this leads to what's called the Kapp Putsch in 1920. This is the Erhard Marine Brigade. Note that name. We're going to hear this name again. More accurately called the Kapp-Luttwitz Putsch. So the Berlin Reichswehr commander is sort of the one who's pulling the strings here. Kapp is the person whose name is attached to it, but it's really Lutwitz who's pulling the strings. Marinen Brigade Erhard. It doesn't work. Von Zicht, who commands the Reichswehr, is the overall commander of the Reichswehr, disbands the Marine Brigade Erhard completely. And you'd think that would be the end of it at this point. You would scatter these troops to the four winds. Actually, no. Now, one of the things that we are looking at as well, and this is the chapter in Evan's book, is the assassination of Walter Rathenau, who's there on the left, sort of the architect of Germany's economic policies. One of the main reasons Germany lasts as long as they do in the First World War. A number of the men who were in this Erhard Marine Brigade wind up going on to join one of the main far-right terrorist organizations in Germany. And this is very soon after very soon after the Kapp push is put down, but the activities of these groups extend even before then. So Kurt Eisner, he was about to resign as president of the People's State of Bavaria. This is the Council Republic in Bavaria, shot in the back on 21st November 1919. Hans Pascha, and there's actually a good biography of him. He's a very interesting person. Yes, he does combine all those different roles: politician, naval officer, pacifist, environmentalist, kind of a militant environmentalist, militant pacifist, if you will. He did a term in the Berlin Workers' and Soldiers' Council. 1920, this organization called Organisation Consul, formed and led by Erhard after his brigade was disbanded. So Pascha is murdered in front of his son. Matthias Erzberger, who's the leader, one of the leaders of the Catholic Center Party, murdered also by this organization, August 21st, 1921. June 22, young man throws acid at Philip Scheidemann, who was actually on a brief holiday. This some sort of this is. And then, of course, Rathenau was assassinated within days after that. So, this is the other part of this political life in Germany. So groups like this, it's not simply groups of veterans who get together, have a beer, and then, maybe go maybe do some, target shooting, and are active in their communities. These are highly organized, militant, well-trained, often well-armed, far-right militias. Some of them are, I'm not even sure some of them are even monarchists, though they tend to be in that camp, or tend toward, I guess, monarchism. They don't like the new parliamentary democracy. They don't like the Social Democrats. They tend to be very, very virulently anti-Semitic, and as we'll see in a moment, tend also to be heavily into Aryanism. Now, this is a lot of text, and in fact, I'm gonna put myself off to the side here. This is in no way. This is in no way comprehensive. This doesn't begin to get at the full range and interconnections of these different groups, but what it does indicate is how some of the main ones are sort of connected to each other, and how they tend to share certain core pieces of literature or core outlooks, and there tends to be overlap in a certain number of their personnel. So, just as today there are enormous numbers of associations. The Reichshammerbund, this is founded in 1912. It's hard to get a hold of Hetschel's work, but this is some of the main work that's popular in Germany from 1901. That's sort of promoting this very particular kind of Aryan race theory. They use the swastika. So the swastika is not a sudden innovation by the National Socialists. 1919, they merge with this one, the Deutsch-Völkischer Schutz- und Trutzbund, German Nationalist Protection Defiance Federation. They also use the swastika, among other things. This actually fairly new. It's also founded February 1919 in Bamberg, so we're talking sort of upper northwest Bavaria. And immediately Alldeutscher Verband. This is the Pan-German League. You may remember that we had some discussion of them when we're talking about Wilhelmine Germany. So, all different kinds of people and allegiances can be part of the Pan-German League. The Deutsch-Völkischer Schutz- und Trutzbund has a publishing house. This is something else we need to be aware of. All of these different organizations have their own publishing wings if they're large enough. The communists do. The sort of the nationalist and far right and occultist organizations do. Eventually, this becomes the Deutsch-Völkische Partei. Now you go down and you say, well, what's the Germanenorden? That's also Theodor Fritsch. This is the more extreme secretive version of the Reichskammerbund. The connections, it's kind of complicated, but they have connections to this sort of claim to be reviving the ancient pre-Christian, pre-Roman religion of the ancient Aryan German peoples, and it's there's they have their whole libraries full of books and devoted to this. And then we have the Marine Brigade Erhard. Of course, we've already talked about them. It suppressed revolutionary movements, communist uprisings in the northern ports. Then it was in Bavaria in the spring of 1919, and then the summer it goes to Silesia, as I mentioned, to put down the first Silesian uprising. After that's disbanded by order of the commanding general of the Reichswehr, then Erhard forms the organization Consul. Murders about 354 people. Is based in Bavaria. We're going to notice this, especially next time. There's a lot of these groups are based in Bavaria. Recruits nationwide. There's about 5,000 members. Has a lot of support from within the Bavarian police. After Ratana's murder, it becomes the Viking League. A number of these people will go on to be pro-Nazi or join the Nazi party, but there's also tensions. At one point, it's not entirely clear. The Viking League is also said to be by Hermann Goering to have declared war on the Nazi Party. What exactly that means, I'm not entirely sure. I think this was detail. I think that's from Stanley Payne's History of Fascism, and Payne doesn't go into detail on this, if I'm remembering my source on this correctly. This kind of sets out this section of their manifesto, if you will, their founding principles, sets out what this terrorist organization is against. It's anti-Semitic. It's against social democracy, left radicalism, fomentation of, and it's dedicated to fomenting internal unrest to overthrow the anti-nationalist Weimar Constitution. They want to recruit determined nationalist-minded men, local shock troops for breaking up meetings of an anti-nationalist nature, etc., etc. Education of the youth in use of arms. And there's a connection with these, which I suddenly forgot. But sometimes the targets of Organization Consul come from contacts in some of these other organizations. And then you have the Thule Society, and now we're getting a little closer to we keep coming back to Bavaria, closer to the main subject of this course. Now, that's a branch of the Germanenorden in Bavaria. This is under Sebottendorf, Rudolf von Sebottendorf. They had a militia group as well. As you see, also they organized a nationalist workers group. Their most active members is small. This is small stuff. This is Anton Drexler, who's kind of their most active member there, and then he branches off on his own. In January 1919, he found something called the German Workers' Party. Um, it seeks the ennoblement of the German worker. Educated and resident workers have the right to be part of the middle class. A sharp dividing line should be drawn between proletarians and workers. So income not produced by work is bad. In other words, usury, finance, and you can see where this is in terms of the stereotypes of anti-Semitism. So it's sort of anti-Semitic at its core because of how they cast this. They cast themselves here. Capital is okay if used in the national interest. So as we'll see, these aspects are sort of ideological aspects are going to remain pretty constant. A number of the the members of the Thule Society who wind up being early Nazis, National Socialists, but this is sort of the stew that's happening. Just a glimpse of the stew that's happening in Bavaria and in Munich in particular. Now, on the national stage, you have emerging parties. This is the German National People's Party, Deutsche National Volkspartei, the DNVP. This is going to be the main hard conservative political party. They're going also. This is from this is the 1920 election. They are going to be the ones who do a coalition government with Hitler down the road. So, looking at their some of the key elements of their political founding principles, freedom from foreign tyranny needed for a national rebirth. Reunite German territories, so they will amend the Versailles Treaty, restore German unity, and recovering colonies. So both the Catholic Center Party and the Conservative Nationalists are agreed that the colonies need to come back to Germany, required for economic development. So they're still working under the assumption that you need to have colonies in order to have a national prosperity. We are connected to all Germans living abroad, particularly those in Austria. One of the key conditions for this new republic was you cannot unite with Austria. They don't want that particular witch's brew to foment and come into being. Foreign policy, the German perspective, monarchy. They want the restoration of the monarchy, specifically the Hohenzollerns. The character of the nations, a firmly united German Reich provides the most important foundation for German greatness. Now, this party is going to eventually, not in 1920, but shortly after this, is going to come under the direction of Alfred Hugenberg. And one of Hugenberg's main strengths is that he has enormous sort of media empire resources. And so the DNVP can always kind of punch above its weight in terms of sheer numbers of people who vote for them, because they get some major representation, but it's like nothing remotely like the Social Democrats. But they have a lot of media. They have a lot of newspapers and radios and so on, and that's well, I guess that's mostly what you would have in the 1920s, and that allows them to sort of punch above their weight. This is one of their campaign posters from the 1920 elections. Save the East. You have a Pole and a socialist seizing a Teutonic knight who looks. I'm always drawn to the expression on this knight's face. It's rather amazing. So vote list 5. So the fifth option is going to be the German National People's Party. The crisis of of this republic really comes in 1923. Germany defaults on its loans. The French and the Belgians occupy the Ruhr, so they cross the Rhine. They take over the industrial heartland. Tooze has said, I think he's right, is that it is an act of war. It's a quasi invasion. There's over 100 Germans, well over 100 Germans who are killed in this. There's widespread. There's passive resistance to French attempts to take over the factories and extract the resources and the coal and send it back to France. And this is when hyperinflation begins to set in. In January, 17,000 marks, German marks equals $1. By December, 4.2 billion marks equals $1. And this is what this is where we sort of see a turning point. So Stresemann, we are introduced to one of the key figures in the Weimar Republic at this point. He becomes chancellor. He's only chancellor for a few months. He's foreign minister during almost the entirety of the Weimar Republic. He forms the German People's Party, the Deutsche Volkspartei, not the national, not that he's not the conservative nationalists. This is a middle-class Protestant base. He has a very close relationship, or at least for most of his tenure as foreign minister, maybe not toward the end, with Aristide Briand, the French foreign minister. They both believe Germany's national interest required peace, reconciliation with France, and integration into the world economy. So, diametrically opposed to what the nationalists, the far right, believe. He does not come from a particularly privileged background, so he's not like one of the he's not one of the political or social elites. His father's a beer distributor. Gets his doctorate in political economy he does his dissertation on beer distribution, or something along those lines. He's a trade union organizer. He was in the national right opposition from 1919 to 21, and then his views change. So he's someone who sort of starts from a nationalist right position and moves toward what we would say, certainly in the U.S., is more like left of center. He lays the foundation of the Dawes Plan. He introduces a new currency this is Hjalmar Schacht. We're going to meet him again. He's the one who puts this together, persuades the French to withdraw. He decides that, you know what, the only way we get a change in the terms of the treaty and something more manageable is to show that we're actually trying to meet those obligations. And that actually does work. So as we get into 1924, this is the May 1924 election is actually pretty big. We see a big Communist Party sort of resurgence. They're gradually being taken under new leadership. Out with the scum, vote for the communists. The flame, the revolution cannot be quenched. So vote communist. The outcome of this election. These are the parties that get the highest share of the vote. So this is the center BVP. The BVP is the Bavarian offshoot of the Catholic Center Party. The Social Democrats are the red. The Nationalists take most of the east, some of the north, and then the DHP. Is it Heimatspartei? I think I'd have to look at that. The way this breaks down, you gotta love. I don't know who Liam Baker 98 is, but the work, the dedication to showing how this breaks down. Some of the coverage on you always go to Wikimedia for data for these sort of images and the breakdown. He does a really good job. So at 472 seats, let's break this down here. So the Social Democrats lose 2 seats. The Conservatives gain 24, so they're almost at parity with the Social Democrats. The Catholic Center Party gains 1, so they're a distinct third place. They're about equal with the Communist Party, who gained 58, but then this is kind of a new formation. These two leaders are about to be superseded. Ruth Fisher, Arkady Maslow, they both... there's a lot of intrigue with the Communist Party. Stalin is trying to bring them more under direct Moscow control. Ernst Thälmann, who's going to be the Communist Party leader within a year, or within the same year. I think he's deputy leader. He's like second in command at this point. He's going to make the party as much as closely as possible modeled on Moscow lines. The Bavarian People's Party loses 4 seats. The German People's Party, that's Stresemann's party, is losing ground. The German Democratic Party loses ground, and then there's this new party which wins 32 seats, the National Socialist Freedom Party, led by Ludendorff. Ludendorff's back. This is a minority government is formed, so the Conservatives and the Social Democrats are shut out, and I think I have this correct as to the main parties who were part of this coalition. Wilhelm Marx' Center Party is chancellor. He had replaced Stresemann. He replaced Stresemann as head of the minority government, and now after the May 24 elections, he's back. Where do these folks come from? Well, they're brand new. They're a brand new party. They win 32 seats. They come from a party which had just been outlawed because its leader had been involved in an attempted uprising in Bavaria, and this is the National Socialist German Workers' Party. But with a lot of their leadership in prison, awaiting trial for sedition and revolution, and the party itself proscribed, this new party forms in the hopes of sort of trying to capitalize on some of that energy. And this kind of brings us to the person whose name has mostly been absent, not completely, but mostly absent from these previous lectures, and that's Adolf Hitler. We say this is a course on Nazi Germany. Where's Adolf Hitler? Well, we're about to find out. But the reason why the Nazis don't show up in the May 24 elections is because, well, they just had themselves a little putsch, an attempted revolution of their own, and it failed pretty badly. So they are out of the picture at that moment. And that's about where we're going to leave off here. And next time we will look at the revolution in Bavaria, the arrival of Adolf Hitler, and the origins and fates of what's going to come to be called the Inner Circle, and how they kind of coalesce around this tiny little German Workers' Party, which, in 1919 had not even 100 members in it. All right, I'll see you next time.